Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, December 8th, 2011 meeting of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. It's just after 6:30. Let's go ahead and get started. Will you call the roll, please?
Timothy Vigg.
Here.
Dean Cars.
Here.
Jeff Braun.
Here.
Joshua Fink. Ann Denny.
Here.
Kate Williams.
Here.
Dale Patrick.
Here.
John Dunham.
Here.
Deanna Willard.
Thank you. We do have a quorum present this evening. A fully constituted board is 9 members. We have 7 members present. 5 positive votes are required to pass any motion before the board. Okay. Agenda item B, minutes. We don't have any for approval. Agenda item C, special order of business, executive sessions. Disclosures. Do we have any disclosures by any board members this evening? Mr. Vigg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to case 2011-136, my company prepared some reports, in I think 1995, that were updated again in 2009 on this subject property, and have an ongoing work relationship with the applicant in this case, and I feel a little bit uneasy about that, but I wanted to get that on the record. I'm interested to hear other board members' thoughts on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vigg. I guess discussion would be welcome. My first question would be, Mr. Vigg, do you feel that there's you mentioned ongoing work, so a potential for financial interest therein, and that perhaps rising to a level that you may need to recuse yourself?
Although not on this particular subject property, yes, we are continuing to work for the applicant in other areas, and the financial aspects are such that it, I think, needs to be disclosed.
All right, Chelsea, do I work through these questions or just... Okay. Mr. Dunham.
Yes, through the chair. Mr. Vigg, do you think that you can make a fair and independent, impartial decision on this case?
I believe I can. I'm concerned about the appearance, so that's my concern.
Well, Mr. Vigg and fellow board members, let's proceed in this way. Let's ask for a positive motion from a board member directing Mr. Vigg to participate in the case. I'll prompt you by that language, I guess, stating something according to, I move to direct Mr. Vigg to participate in case number 2011-136. We'll have that motion before us, and then if there's more discussion listed, we can go that way.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Any additional discussion? Any more questions for Mr. Vigg that may help him determine whether or not he should be? Yes, Mr. Cars.
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Vigg, just for clarification, you are not involved, your company is not involved with this specific property?
My understanding is not after the original inspection report was prepared that documented the existing conditions and I believe recommended the demolition of the existing structure.
And are the terms of your, through the chair, are the terms of your contract complete with this project?
I believe with respect to this particular parcel, yes.
And one last question through the chair. The scope of your work was just with respect to the demolition of the existing structure, not with regard to the proposed development?
I don't believe we had any role in the concept of the proposed development. No.
Thank you.
more of an assessment of the existing structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. I think that answers the question that I'd like to ask, but I'd like to get on the record as well. Mr. Vig, the interest that's being discussed, that of financial between your company and the case involved, does that have the potential to vary directly and substantially with the outcome of the case that we're about to hear?
I don't believe it would.
Mr. Dunham, do you have another question? Okay, sorry, I haven't crossed you off the list there. Any other board members have questions for Mr. Vig? Mr. Vig, any final comments before we take it to a vote?
No.
Okay. Then I'll ask that board members vote, and a positive vote would, in fact, direct Mr. Vig to participate in this case, and a nay vote would show that you wish Mr. Vig be recused. With Mr. Vig, okay. The motion passes with 6 yea votes, Mr. Vig abstaining, and 2 board members absent. Thank you, Mr. Vig, for that disclosure. Any other disclosures? Mr. Cars.
Yes, with respect to case 2011-139, I believe the applicants, although I don't see them here this evening, are both employed with departments of the municipality of Anchorage, Anchorage Water, Wastewater Utility, and the Heritage Land Bank. And my firm does do work for the city, for the municipality, for Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. We do not currently have any projects either under their specific management or have direct contact with either of them, but I did want to disclose it. I don't feel that would affect my decision or my impartiality in making a decision on the case. I do want to disclose that.
Thank you, Mr. Cars, for that disclosure. One question, do you think that disclosure rises to the level of a conflict of interest? You mentioned that you don't think that it would, in fact, affect your impartiality.
I do not think it would.
Okay. Unless any board members have opposition, I'm fine with Mr. Cars participating in that case. I do have a disclosure as well. Minor, in fact, I was employed by the firm described by Mr. Vig. I had no participation in the case as it will be presented tonight, but want to get that on the record as well. Any other disclosures? Yep, seeing none, let's move on. And for those of you in the audience that missed it on the way in, there are copies of the agenda and the case packets out in the lobby if you'd like to follow along. All right, agenda item D, consent agenda. We have 3 resolutions for approval. Resolution number 2011-023, resolution number 2011-024, and resolution number 2011-026. Have all board members had a chance to review those resolutions for approval? Okay. Someone please make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Mr. Vig, thank you. Mr. Cars, thank you for that second. Would anybody like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Okay. Any opposition to approval of the consent agenda? Seeing none, consent agenda is approved. Don't believe we have any appearance requests, no unfinished business, nothing on our regular agenda. Agenda item H, public hearings. Before we move forward into public hearings, I'd like to read for everyone the order of business and how the public hearing will proceed. The chair shall introduce the variance and explain the procedure to be followed. The variance case number and the name of the applicant shall be read into the record. The board shall hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of notice. The board shall hear a brief staff presentation outlining the variance, not to exceed 10 minutes. On conclusion of the staff presentation, the board members and the applicant may then direct questions to the staff through the chair. The applicant shall give his or her presentation, again not to exceed 10 minutes. Throughout the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of the evidence that the variance should be granted. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and the staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The hearing shall then be open for public testimony. Each person has 3 minutes. All persons who testify may be questioned by the board, the staff, or the applicant. On conclusion of that public testimony, the staff, followed by the applicant, shall have the right of rebuttal. The board shall proceed to develop oral findings and conclusions with regard to the variance and disposition of the variance. The staff shall reduce the oral findings and conclusions to writing for subsequent adoption by the board at a later meeting. The matter then rests with the board, and the chair asks for a positive motion from the board. Okay. With that, let's get started with our first case. 2011-136 is the petitioner Alaska Housing Finance Corporation or their representative present this evening. If so, please indicate so.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you'll have a seat for just a minute.
Okay.
We'll hear from staff about sufficiency of notice in their presentation, and then the petitioner will have an opportunity to present their case. Ms. O'Brien, I believe this is your case. Could you please provide sufficiency of notice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 86 public hearing notices were mailed. To date, 1 notice was returned in opposition. None were returned in support. 2 notices were returned unclaimed. This is a variance to build a 4-unit structure on a lot in the R2M district that does not meet the minimum lot size. The petition site is Lot 2, Block 1, Muldoon Heights subdivision. It's located on the east side of Boston Street and south of East 10th Avenue. The property is a rectangular-shaped lot. It contains 9,688 square feet that is developed with a triplex. It's located in the R2M district, which requires 8,500 square foot lot size for a 3-unit dwelling. As mentioned, the existing structure is uninhabitable, and the petitioner proposes to raise this building and to construct a 4-unit structure to provide low-income and ADA accessible housing. An 11,000 square foot lot is required for a 4-unit building. There is a 1,312 square foot shortfall of meeting that 11,000 square foot standard. In reviewing the variance from AMC 2140-045 F1, it appears that 4 of the standards for granting a variance are partially or substantially met. Standard 1 does not appear to be met. There do not appear to be exceptional or extraordinary conditions affecting this lot. The lot is equivalent to other lots in this subdivision in terms of shape and acreage, and it does not appear to be impacted by creeks, streams, wetlands, and it does not appear to be steeply sloped. Standard number 2, the proposal to eliminate substandard housing to provide low-income and accessible housing, while it is a very worthy goal and achieves certain policies of Anchorage 2020, the special circumstances referred to in Standard 1 refer to physical characteristics rather than the characteristics of the user or potential future users of the property. Standard 3 does not appear to be met. The variance arises from the request to build a 4-unit structure on a lot that does not meet the required minimum lot size. I can understand the applicant's desire to maximize the use of this particular property because as only 8,500 square foot lot is required for a 3-unit structure, they have almost 12,000 square feet in excess of the minimum lot size for a 3-unit structure. The petitioner's goal would serve an underserved segment of the municipality's population. However, the lot can be developed in a conforming manner, even though it has access to the minimum lot size for a 3-unit structure. Standard 4 does appear to be substantially met. As mentioned, it will not, the 4-unit structure does not appear to affect the use of the adjacent property. It is a permitted use under the zoning code, and on the contrary, the proposed development will improve the housing stock by eliminating substandard housing, and there are no that are no longer habitable. The proposed housing located in a mixed-density residential subdivision is in conformance with Anchorage 2020 Policy 7 that states to avoid incompatible uses adjoining one another. It is a residential use in a residential subdivision. Standard 5 also appears to be partially and maybe substantially met. The variance is in keeping with the intent of this code. It will not change the character of the neighborhood. The 4 dwelling units yield a density of 17%. That falls within the recommended density for this dwelling unit, as well as the recommended density in the R2M zoning district. There is a site plan that was submitted, and it does seem to demonstrate that the applicable zoning requirements are generally or could be met with a redesign of the proposed development. Standard 6 also appears to be substantially met. The variance, if it's granted, would have a positive impact on the health, safety, and welfare. It would remove the substandard housing, it would provide new housing, and it would serve an underserved segment of the Anchorage's population. It also conforms to Anchorage 2020 Policy number 15 that recommends adopting standards to ensure that new residential development provides for a variety of lot sizes and housing types for a range of households and age groups. And Standard 7 appears to be met partially because the variance requested is the minimum that's required in order to meet a goal of the petitioner to provide accessible and affordable housing. However, the department must recommend denial because it appears that not all of the 7 standards are either partially or substantially met. But if at the conclusion of the public hearing, the board finds that those standards are met, the department does provide on pages 8 and 9 potential conditions for the board's consideration in the event the variance is approved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Do any board members have questions for staff? Mr. Vig.
Thank you. Ms. O'Brien, just looking for a clarification on page 3 of the packet, under the site description and proposal, it describes the lot being rectangular shaped with dimensions of 103 and some odd feet by about 65 feet, and I think that must be a typo or something. If the lot size is 9,688 square feet, there seems to be a discrepancy there, and I just want to make sure we're good with the actual lot size. I guess now that I take more time to look at some of the as-built information, I can see that it's 73 by 130, 31 on the as-built. So we can assume that was a typo there then.
Through the chair, Mr. Vig, thank you. That's what it appears to be. Thank you for the correction.
Thank you. And then the maximum number of dwelling units for a given area of lot size is based solely on the number of dwelling units and not on the number of bedrooms or other features of the dwelling unit.
Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vig, that is correct. It is on page 2 of the packet, gives the standards for the current R2M zoning district, and gives the minimum lot area based on the number of dwelling units, not bedrooms.
Okay, thank you.
Do other board members have questions for Ms. O'Brien? I do have a question, Ms. O'Brien, on page 6 of the staff packet. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sixth paragraph down, starting AMC 214503B requires a 10-foot separation distance between an accessory structure and a principal structure in reference to the carports. I guess first question is, are carports, according to that AMC reference, considered an accessory structure? Based on the statement, it appears that that's what you're trying to say. I just want to clarify that.
Mr. Chair, they are a carport that any structure that rises above, more than 30 inches above grade is considered a structure. It is not attached to the dwelling units, so it's a structure accessory to the principal unit of the dwelling units.
Okay. Then there's mention of redrafting the site plan to meet department recommendations. Then would this be one of those situations requiring redesign, otherwise resulting in violation of this code?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. It would have to, the way the proposal is designed right now, as shown on page 14 of the packet, the dwelling units, which is a nice architectural feature, they are staggered. But if you'll notice the corners of the carport from the corner of the structure, that is not 10 feet. So all points of an accessory structure has to be separated by a 10-foot separation distance.
Okay.
And I understand that that's basically related to fire safety.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien, for showing me the location of that. And also, I noticed that you've included it as a department recommendation in the staff packet. So thank you. Any other board member questions for staff? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. O'Brien, for that presentation. If the petitioner would please come forward. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Ron Goffner. Goffner, G-O-U-G-H-N-O-U-R.
Good evening, Mr. Goffner. You'll have 10 minutes for your presentation. Let me know if you'd like to reserve some for rebuttal at the end.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair, and board members and staff. I'm here representing Alaska Housing. I'm their authorized representative for this variance request. During my presentation, I'll be using the term Alaska Housing in regards for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, and I'll be using Anchorage when I'm referencing the municipality of Anchorage. Also, one of the things that was not brought up that missed the staff packet was a letter that we received from the Northeast Community Council in support of our variance request, and if I may, can I present that to the board?
Yeah, please do. I do believe in comments received after the staff report was written, board members do have a copy of what the Community Council voted upon.
Okay. I just wanted to ensure that we have that.
Perhaps if you could bring that forward, make sure we're looking at the same thing. That's what we have in our packet, so. Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and submit that then. Please hand it to Jill, and we'll distribute. Thank you. She'll submit that into the record. We'll need to keep a copy with the record for 30 days, and we'll pass those out here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be referring to the questions of standards as questions 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7, and will not repeat the entire question for brevity. Also on questions 4 and 6, the standards that the planning staff indicate Alaska Housing has substantially met. I will not present new evidence, but will state that Alaska Housing concurs with their findings of substantially met. As for question 1, staff in their packet identified an issue dealing with the Alaska Supreme Court, and I just want to point out the fact that when they're talking about that particular court ruling, that it was from a 1979 Alaska Supreme Court case for the city and borough of Juneau from their ordinance 49, which contains language different from our current language, and our language does include not limited to, and this changes the whole meaning and how it could be looked at today by our courts on there. Going farther into the question number 1, the first part of the question that I want to talk about, there exists exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances of the subject property. Webster's dictionary defines property as something owned or possessed, specifically a piece of real estate. And Webster's dictionary goes on to define real estate as property and buildings and land. So does Alaska Housing really have an extraordinary physical circumstance of the subject property, in particular the building? Yes. The subject property is not inhabitable per HUD standards for public housing. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute or two here. The next part of the question, such as, but not limited to, streams, wetlands, or slope. Not limited to. This is the big difference between the court case that's referenced from CBJ and our code. So the board members can look at other physical aspects of the property in addition to the land itself, such as improvements on the property, following the definition property and real estate. Now, last part of the question, and such physical circumstances are not applicable to other land in the same district. Alaska Housing is charged to provide low-income housing to Alaskans, and in particular Alaska Housing using federal funds, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Alaska Housing is obligated to follow the standards established by HUD for housing. These requirements establish the uniform physical condition standards for public housing and housing that is insured and or assisted under the HUD program, collectively referred to as HUD properties. The uniform physical condition standards are intended to ensure that HUD program participants, which Alaska Housing is a member, carry out their legal obligations to maintain HUD properties in accordance with in a condition that is decent, safe, sanitary, and in good repair. To that end, Alaska Housing conducted a study in 1996 and updated that study in 2009. The study identified issues in the structure such as asbestos, structural concerns, and electrical hazards, and the property was deemed uninhabitable due to economic cost to repair. The cost exceeds 80% of the value of the structure. The property is currently not occupied and pending demolition. There are standards. These standards are not encumbered on or applicable to other non-HUD properties in Anchorage. The physical circumstances of the property necessitate demolition. Alaska Housing proposes redevelopment to provide an increase in low-income and ADA housing in Anchorage. The proposed development meets all other codes for parking, setbacks, usable yard, and lot coverage. We feel that Alaska Housing has met the standards for question 1. Question 2. Alaska Housing is demolishing the current building and intends to reconstruct. The shortage of decent low-income and ADA housing in Anchorage presents a hardship to the citizens of Anchorage and Anchorage as a community. A strict application of the code will create a hardship not on Alaska Housing, but on its citizens. Alaska Housing provides low-income housing to Alaskans, and in this case proposes to provide all low-income units, one that will be fully accessible ADA and one for sight and sound. Need for low-income and ADA housing is great. As of August 2011, there was a waiting list of 862 families for single-family units and 688 families waiting for two-bedroom units. The proposed construction would help mitigate the hardship posed to priests due back to lack of housing or living in substandard conditions. The issue hardship here is not about Alaska housing, but a potential necessity. Further, the issue is not that tenants would be deprived of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same district, but rather former tenant Alaska residents would be allowed could afford low-income housing as their counterparts do here in town. Also, in addition to that, there is adjacent to the RR2M, diagonally across the street in R3 zoning area, which has 6 high-density fourplex units on 6,000 square foot lots. Again, Alaska Housing feels that we have substantially met the standard for question 2. Question 3. The hardship is not self-imposed. It is not a desire. Alaska Housing is charged by Alaska statute, Title 18, Chapter 56, to provide low-cost and low-income multifamily housing. The hardship is that hardship placed on low-income and disabled individuals and families in Alaska without a decent, safe, and sanitary place to live. The proposed variance is an attempt by Alaska Housing to mitigate that hardship, to provide one more low-income housing unit in Anchorage. If you are that family waiting for the next available low-income family unit to become available, you know exactly where the hardship lies. The hardship, therefore, is not self-imposed or a matter of inconvenience. Rather, is a hardship of social economics which Alaska Housing is working to mitigate, and this variance is working towards that. Never to mitigate the shortage of low-cost, low-income housing to Anchorage residents, Alaska Housing proposes to provide one additional habitable low-income ADA unit for occupancy by one of these families in need of a decent and safe place to live. The economy of scale associated with using taxpayers' money to construct a fourplex versus a threeplex in terms of construction costs, maintenance, administrative costs is quantifiable and a value upon which Alaska Housing is charged to do, and Anchorage should capitalize on this. These special conditions and circumstances did not result from the actions of Alaska Housing, and such conditions and circumstances do not merely constitute inconvenience for Alaska Housing, but what they are charged to do by the state. Again, we feel that Alaska Housing has substantially met question 3. Question 5. As planning staff indicated, we have partially met the standard and could substantially meet it with a redesign of the building and site layout. The issue identified by staff will become part of the conditions with the approval of the variance. When we move into the design phase, we will resolve all the conditions of the variance. We feel that we have met this substantially. Question 7. Alaska Housing's goal is to provide decent and safe, low-cost Alaska housing. This project increases available housing by one unit with a waiting list of over 1,000 families for it. Alaska Housing's goal is in step with Alaska 2020 plan and providing affordable housing. Alaska Housing is taking great steps to minimize the impact of this project and meeting all other requirements, including residential density of 17% versus a maximum of 20% for this area, and we're only looking at 33% lot coverage versus maximum 40% lot coverage. Again, we feel we have substantially met question 7. Alaska Housing is working to best serve the low-income and ADA citizens of Anchorage by providing decent, safe, affordable, low-cost housing. Alaska Housing believes that all the standards have been substantially met and conforms with the intent of Anchorage 2020 plan. Northeast Community Council supports our request for building a fourplex. In closing, I want to thank all of you board members. You're here representing the citizens of Anchorage. to make the best decision for the people of Anchorage, based on the title, the evidence, and the arguments presented here. I appreciate your time and effort in hearing our case. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goffner. Do any board members have questions for Mr. Goffner? Mr. Dunham.
Mr. Goffner, do you have I may have missed it in the packet, but I didn't see that you were an authorized representative of the petitioner. Do you have something in writing? I noticed that there is someone in the audience that is an authorized representative.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dunn, in the packet there is a letter in there authorizing Perlowski Consulting Engineers to be the representative for Alaska Housing,
Right.
and we do have our client here. If, Doc Kraus, if you'd like to hear from him.
I just needed to know that you were authorized to speak for the petitioner.
Yes. Page 36.
Mr. Vig.
Thank you. Mr. Goffner, if the board finds that the 7 standards have been substantially met, I think you've spoken to the applicant's willingness to undertake some redesign to accommodate some of their concerns. There are also, on pages 8 and 9 of the staff packet, 8 conditions that the staff was recommending would be subject to approval. Have you read those, and can those be accommodated?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dick, yes, we have read those. We have looked at all those. We have talked to the different departments, traffic in particular, right away. And we do see that we have a concept design at this level that can be modified to deal with the issues that have been identified, including the 10-foot separation between the main structure and the carport. At this time, we're not under contract to do that redesign, but we have looked at that. We can accommodate all the conditions on there, and as I stated earlier, we will resolve all those issues, and it's a deal. It is doable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board members have questions for Mr. Goffner? Mr. Kars.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Goffner, we as a board must find that all 7 standards are met to pass a variance, and you've addressed the standards that staff did not feel that those standards were met. However, with respect to standard 1, I understand your argument in finding, or your belief that standard is met. However, I'm struggling to see how that applies to this specific variance, which is there's an existing triplex on a lot. You're looking to raise the building and put a fourplex on that lot. How does the argument that you've tried to use apply to putting in a fourplex on this lot when a triplex would not require a variance?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Kars, I'm trying to answer that for you. Alaska Housing is charged to provide low-cost, low-income housing. They're using taxpayers' money, and Alaska Housing needs to do what they can to minimize the cost of the low-cost housing they're providing. And there is an opportunity for us to do that on this lot. We're able to minimize other impacts by a footprint that's smaller than what could be there, lower density. We're looking for 2 units that would be 1 bedroom. So we're looking at a lower density than what's there now. And we feel that due to the fact that we're under different criteria imposed upon Alaska Housing from HUD. We do have extraordinary circumstances, and that my argument is that we need to look at not only just the land, but the buildings that we're dealing with here.
Thank you.
Mr. Dunham, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Goffner, I guess I want to follow up on what Mr. Cars just asked you, and I'm not getting how this, it sounds like what you're saying is that because taxpayer money's involved, we should grant a variance? And I don't get the connection between that and the physical circumstances of the lot.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dunham, I'll try and answer that. It is very difficult to look at it. The land itself, if we take a look at just the physical attributes of it, are not there. We'll grant you that. We're looking at that the way the statute is written and the standard is written, it opens the door for us to look at other issues. And the other issues is that we need to, one, replace the structure. I think everyone's in agreement with that from what's been presented. What we're trying to do is accomplish a number of different facts, or not facts, but goals here. We're wanting to do a replacement, get more housing in here. There's a waiting list. We need that. And we have an opportunity on this lot to put a fourplex. It's not a large fourplex. The rooms, the apartments are not much more than 800 square foot. It's a minimal impact, and it's not having an adverse impact on the neighborhood. But Alaska Housing is charged to get the best bang for their buck that they can, because they're using taxpayers' money. And you can construct a fourplex much cheaper than you can a threeplex on the same lot. And then when you're looking at the life cycle costs of maintenance and administration, it's cheaper with 4 units there together than it is with 3. I hope I've been able to clarify that or shed more light on that for you. Thank you.
Any other questions by the board? Okay, seeing none at this time, thank you, Mr. Goffner. Actually, excuse me, just 1 minute. Ms. O'Brien, did staff have any questions for the petitioner?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. O'Brien. With that, we'll open the hearing up for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in this case? If so, please come forward. Okay, seeing no one, the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. With no public testimony, I suppose there's no rebuttal. Okay. Mr. Goffner, you did have 10 seconds on the clock. If you wanted to use that 10 seconds, feel free to do so.
Thank you. We'll pass on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goffner. Okay, public hearing is closed. With that, the matter now rests with the board. I'll ask a board member for a positive motion in this case. Mr. Cars, thank you. Please state your motion.
Yes. With regard to case 2011-136, I move that we grant a variance to allow construction of a fourplex structure on a 9,688 square foot lot in the R2M district that does not meet the minimum 11,000 square foot lot size required by AMC 2140-045F1, subject to staff recommendations 1 through 8 on pages 8 and 9 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Mr. Dunham, did you second that motion?
Yes, I did.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Mr. Cars, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. While I appreciate the applicant's arguments and understand their request, I don't intend to support the motion. finding that standards 1, 2, and 3 are not met. I do concur with staff. Standard 4, 5, 6 are met, and I'm not sure that standard 7 is met. As I reviewed the case and read the arguments by the applicant, I don't feel that they've persuaded me that that there are any extraordinary circumstances that are applicable to this specific variance. It's a triplex. They could put a triplex on there, and there would be no variance required. And that specifically speaks to standard 3 as well as standard 1. Standard 2, again, the triplex would be sufficient or a triplex could be constructed, and so the special circumstances don't pertain to the uses of the land, but to the land itself as written by staff. So for those reasons, I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Mr. Dunham, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I also do not intend to support this motion, and I concur with what Mr. Cars had mentioned as far as his findings on not meeting standards 1, 2, or 3. I think that, it's admirable that the petitioner wants to provide additional housing on this property. It's just that if we waive this standard strictly because it's financially more viable to build a fourplex than a threeplex, we need to consider that for everyone else. And one of the standards we have to consider is whether or not it's a pecuniary hardship. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Would any of the board members like to discuss the motion? Ms. Denny.
I agree with Mr. Cars and Mr. Dunham and the findings of staff, and I also do not plan to support the motion. Just in reviewing the proposed structure for this lot, the living quarters just seem substandard to me. I'm looking at a dining area that's 6 foot wide by 7 foot long. That's about enough room for a table and chairs, and not much else. And then they're taking into account for the 400 square foot yard area, and they're using the easements as part of their consideration for a yard. And I've seen where that has run into issues in other cases. So I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Mr. Vig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a pretty unusual case since I've been on the board here for 3 years, and having a public housing agency who has certain charters and expectations to be met to come forward and make a case, and I think the applicant did a pretty good job, actually. In terms of standards 1 and 2, as I understood Mr. Goffner's points, the federal requirements imposed by HUD and others dictate some pretty high bars to meet, and I think those are some pretty extraordinary circumstances because they apply to this particular parcel because of the ownership. I think a case could be made for that to be at least partially met. And with respect to standard number 2, strict application of this code would create an exceptional or undue hardship. I have to think that when there's a shortage of 862 single-bedroom units in the municipality of Anchorage, I think that that's a pretty big hardship for an agency like AHFC to try to overcome. And so, similarly, I could see where that standard could be, in my mind, considered substantially met. So I understand the difficulty that some of the board members are having with interpretation of this. It's a very unusual case. I think I'm viewing it a little differently, perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Appreciate your interpretation on standards 1 and 3, and also the petitioner's approach to describing their position on those standards. Weighing that against Mr. Dunham's comments about pecuniary hardship, and I question whether or not the petitioner could meet the high bar that Mr. Vig mentioned with a triplex. Although I didn't ask the petitioner that directly, can that occur and the property still be developed and meet some need, if not all the need, as is trying to be met in the way that they are. I don't intend to support the motion. I think that standards 1 and 3 for me need more than just the financial ties described by the petitioner, and have difficulty in overcoming that. And for those reasons, I don't intend to support the motion. Any other board member comments, discussion? Okay. With that, please vote. The motion fails with 5 nay votes, 2 yea votes, and two board members absent. With that, I must read for the record. Every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. Moving on to case number 2, 2011-140. Is the petitioner, Ms. Jennings, present? If so, she has indicated she's here. Welcome back, by the way. Ms. Iverson, welcome.
Thank you.
I believe this is your case. Please provide sufficiency of notice.
On November 16th, 48 public hearing notices were mailed to property owners within 600 feet. At the time the report was written, no comments have been received. 4 notices were returned, and we have also laid on the table the Girdwood Land Use Committee decision regarding this case.
Thank you, Ms. Iverson. Go ahead and proceed with your presentation whenever you're ready.
This is a request for variances from AMC 2109-060B to allow an encroachment into the secondary front yard setback along Brenner Circle, and a variance from AMC 2145-210 to allow an encroachment into the 25-foot stream protection setback. The recommendation is that all 7 standards need to be met, and they have not, and so therefore the recommendation is for denial. This lot is zoned GR1, and the minimum square feet is 10,400 square feet, which is larger than the size of the subject property. This lot also has frontage on 3 sides, has a 25-foot setback along Alyeska Highway, a 10-foot setback along Brenner Circle and Brenner Road, and a 10-foot side yard setback. The applicant seeks to construct a garage with a second-story living area in the same footprint as a pre-existing carport, which lost its non-conforming eligibility when it collapsed in 2000. The addition will encroach 3.2 feet into the 10-foot front yard setback and 20 feet into the 25-foot stream setback. Regarding the findings, staff has found that standard number 1 is substantially met. This lot is smaller than the minimum lot size required, and it has 3 frontages and a 25-foot stream setback, resulting in a very small buildable area for the lot. Regarding standard 2, the applicant's house is smaller than most of the lots in the area and does not have a garage or a carport like many of the other residents in the area. And staff finds that that standard is met. For standard number 3, we found is partially met, and this is the only standard that we did not recommend finding to be met. For the first part of it, we do find that there are physical peculiarities of the lot as described in finding 1. However, the need for the variance is a result of the action of the property owner. By simply building this garage, that creates the need for the variance. For standard number 4, approval of this variance will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare, and it appears to be met. For standard number 5, this request is for a dimensional variance and not a use variance, and it also appears to be met. Standard number 6 also appears to be met. We do not see there to be any area-wide impacts. Regarding the environmental impacts of the encroachment into the stream setback, Watershed Management has requested condition of approval number 3, which states that no additional area within the stream protection setback will be used for driveways, parking areas, or other prohibited activities. For standard number 7, that also appears to be met. The dimensions of the proposed garage are a standard size for a garage, making it possible for a modest-sized garage. Therefore, the recommendation, since standard number 3 was only determined to be partially met, is for denial. If after the public hearing the board establishes findings that the standards are substantially met, the department recommends approval subject to conditions 1 through 3 on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Iverson. Do any board members have questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, thank you. If the petitioner would please come forward, state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Wendy Jennings, Jennings.
All right, good evening, Ms. Jennings. You'll have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, well,
Ms. Jennings, if you could pull the mic down just a little bit so we could record your voice into the record.
okay. Well, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I guess I'll go ahead and just read my answers to the questions. Is that acceptable?
That is acceptable. We'll ask that you speak to the standards as much as you can. Yep.
Okay. So for number 1, there exists exceptional, extraordinary physical circumstances. My property is surrounded by streams, wetlands, and utilities. The property is on a steep slope. The property is non-conforming with free front yards, and the property is dramatically limiting the available land for improvement and development. There's actually nowhere else to build on this lot because of the way it's set up. Subject property was built with the same footprint now being requested. There was a carport. It collapsed in 2000. This new building will be in the same place that the carport was. And that was the plan all along when I purchased the home, was to build a garage with a bedroom over it. It just happened a little soon, the collapse. The lot is oddly shaped. As you can see, it's really narrow where the carport's going to be, and then it widens up out onto the Alyeska Highway, where there's a 25-foot setback. Number 2, the physical circumstances. Strict application of this code would not allow me to improve the property by adding a garage with a master bedroom over it as originally intended when purchased. Expanding the existing structure will immediately and greatly improve the quality of life for me and my family. Every other home in the cul-de-sac has either a carport or a garage entering from the same entryway through Brenner Circle. There's no other place to build due to the creek slope and proximity of neighboring property lines, the size of the lot, and other municipal setbacks. Owner will be at an economic disadvantage compared to the other homes in the same neighborhood due to imposed setbacks limiting the size of her home, even from its original design footprint, accepted by zoning at that time. Prior to winter 2000 act of nature, inordinate snowfall taking down the carport. All other homes in the neighborhood have much greater living space and or potential for such. Number 3, hardship is not self-imposed. I guess I disagree with what she's finding. I could not control the amount of snow that collapsed the carport the same day the school roof came down, by the way. Lots of roofs came down that day, decks, roofs. It was the conditions. And I did not know, I guess I have to claim some ignorance there, that you had to build within a certain amount of time for it to be grandfathered in. So if I had known that, I would have done things differently. The variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted under this code. My neighbors are in support of my garage bedroom. They agree that my family needs more living space, and a garage would help to get garage-type items out of sight. I plan to attend the next land use committee, which I did. No vegetation will be disturbed in the expansion. Construction will remain the same graveled area as the original structure. No trees need to be removed. Number 5, I only want to replace the original carport with a garage and a much-needed bedroom. And I did not know when it collapsed that I had to rebuild it. There's no other purpose for this request. The variance, if granted, does not adversely affect the health and safety of the municipality of Anchorage. Proposed addition will be an improvement, not only for my family, but the neighborhood and general property tax base. The structure will be on the Brenner side and mostly not visible from the Alyeska Highway. Also, the stream and any wildlife will not be affected in any way. Number 7, the variance granted is the minimum variance that will make possible a reasonable use of land. I cannot foresee any other requests for additional variances. I was unaware the creek setback existed until I had to rebuild the carport. I did not know when I bought the property that the municipality controlled 70% of my lot. I think the setbacks have changed since I bought it. I don't know. There was nothing about a creek that I'm aware of. There was a building permit granted to the builder that I hired. And it was after they were granted a building permit that they were told it needed to go for this creek review. And so when they determined that it was a creek was after the permit was issued. So that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Jennings.
Thank you.
If you can hold on for just a minute. Board members may have a few questions for you. Any board members have questions for the petitioner? No? Okay. Ms. Iverson, does staff have any questions?
No.
Okay. Mr. Vig?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a little slow on the draw there, but I was hoping to ask Ms. Jennings a question.
Okay.
The size of your proposed garage, is it, how would you describe that compared to the size of the carport that collapsed? Is it the same, within the
It's
same
identical.
identical size?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by board members? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Jennings. Have a seat. We'll open the hearing up for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in this case? If so, please come forward. Please state and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Larry Peterson. My last name, Peterscn.
Hello again, Mr. Peterson. You'll have
Hello again.
3 minutes for your testimony. Go ahead when you're ready.
I live in the house adjacent to Miss Jennings, and I support her request for a variance. My letter of support is in your packet. It's on page 41. As she has stated, this will improve the quality of life of her family. She has 2 teenage children, a young man and a young lady, and I'm pretty sure they would love to see this addition onto the rear of the home. Not only will it improve the property value of her home, but it will improve the property value of my home and my neighbors. I don't believe she's asking for anything out of the ordinary that any of us would want for our families. And I have a neighbor just north of me, and he couldn't be here tonight, but he was at the Land Use Committee meeting, and his name is Fire Captain Jeff Hoke, Fire Station 4, and he also supports her request for a variance. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Any board members have questions for Mr. Jennings? No? Okay. Sorry, Mr. Cars, I continue to look down at you.
I think it's Mr. Peterson, but I was just going to...
It is Ms. Jennings and Mr. Peterson.
But I was just going to offer that if he wants to come back a third time, we might look to recruit him for being on the
For
board.
service on the board?
Yeah.
Stick around after the meeting, Mr. Peterson. No.
Thank you very much.
Staff have any questions or?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wishing to testify on this case? Okay. Ms. Jennings, do you have any rebuttal, any additional comments? Okay. Seeing none. With that, public testimony is closed, public hearing is closed, and the matter now rests with the board. I'll ask a board member to put forward a positive motion in the case. Ms. Williams, thank you. Please state your motion.
In case number 2011-140, I move we grant variances from AMC 21.09.060B to allow an encroachment into the secondary front yard setback along Brenner Circle, and AMC 21.45.210 to allow an encroachment into the 25-foot stream protection setback, subject to the conditions on pages 6 and 7 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And for clarification, on the record's sake, is that conditions 1 through 3 on pages 6 and 7?
Yes, conditions 1 through 3.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
Pages 6 and 7.
Ms. Denny, is that second yours?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you. I do intend to support this motion. I agree with staff and their findings for standards 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7, but I disagree on standard 3. I do believe that standard is substantially met. 1, because of the physical circumstances of the property, including the fact that it's smaller than other lots in the area. There's 3 front yards frontages and the large stream setback. I also disagree. I don't think that the need for the variance is the result of the actions of the petitioner. The accident with the snow was completely outside of the petitioner's control. And I also believe that staff had said that the non-conforming rights were lost when the amount of damage was greater than 50% of the cost to replace. So again, that was outside of the petitioner's control. I also believe that had the property not been rezoned after the petitioner bought it, that she would have been able to reconstruct the the carport or build the garage with the room over above it. On standard 4, I also am very persuaded on that, in that the petitioner's next-door neighbor supports the request, and also the community council supports the request. And for 7, besides the justifications that staff provided, I also think it's minimum in that she is going to construct the garage and in the exact same footprint as the previous carport. So for those reasons, I do intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Ms. Denny, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I agree with Ms. Williams. And on standard number 3, Part B, I believe that the reason that she's having the issue with having to apply for a variance is the fact that it was rezoned, and the additional 25-foot stream setback was added, which inhibited having the carport garage rebuilt in the original location. So I do plan to support the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Denny. Any other board member discussion or comments on the motion? Okay. Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. The motion passes with 7 yea votes and 2 board members absent. Shall read for the record. Every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. Thank you, Ms. Jennings. Is there a need for a break, or board members okay to carry on for at least one more case? Okay. Staff, we doing okay? All right. Moving on to the third case of the evening, case number 2011-139, is the petitioner Allison Smith and or Kurt Egelhofer present. They've indicated they are here. Ms. O'Brien, your case again. Please provide sufficiency of notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 123 public hearing notices were mailed to date, including a comment that was laid on the table tonight. 8 comments were received opposing the request. None were received in support of the request. 2 were returned unclaimed. This is a request to allow construction of a single-car garage that will encroach into a required 20-foot front yard setback in the R2D zoning district. The petition site is Lot 4, Block 33D, South Addition. It's located on the south side of West 14th Avenue between P and S Streets and north of West 15th Avenue. The property is developed with a single-family residential structure. Currently, it was built in 1965 according to property appraisal records, and there is an attached carport at the northwest corner of the dwelling. This carport was not part of the original construction. Based on review of aerial photos, the carport was not part of the original construction. It was not constructed in 1977, but by September of 78, it does appear on aerial photograph. The carport encroaches entirely into the 5-foot side yard setback. It extends approximately 2.5 inches into Lot 5 that adjoins the west boundary. There's a concrete driveway that also encroaches nearly 8.5 inches into Lot 5. And the carport does encroach 12.7 feet into the required 20-foot front yard setback. Vehicular West 14th Avenue provides the only vehicular access to the property. There is no other opportunity to access this property. The proposal of the petitioner is to remove that existing carport and the concrete, both on the petition site and on the property to the west, and to construct a single-car garage with a covered walkway on the east side of the proposed garage. The new garage would extend 4 feet into the required 20-foot front yard setback. It would eliminate the roof and concrete driveway encroachments into Lot 5. It would eliminate 100% of the encroachment into the required side yard setback, and it will reduce the front yard encroachment by over 8.5 feet. In reviewing the standards for granting a variance, it does not appear that standard 1 is either substantially or partially met. There does not appear to be any special or unique conditions pertaining to the lot itself. So that standard cannot be found to be met. The standard 2 also does not appear to be substantially or partially met. The applicant does mention in their application that they basically don't have a conforming alternative due to the location of the structure on the lot and the fact that there is no other alternative access to the property in order to reduce all of the existing encroachments and substantially reducing the front yard encroachment to 4 feet. They have no conforming alternative. Those are very valid arguments, but however, it doesn't appear that those arguments apply to the actual physical characteristics of the lot itself. Standard 3 appears to be partially met. The current petitioner has owned this property only 1 year, slightly over 1 year, and these encroachments have existed for 33 years. They did not create the encroachments, nor did any prior property owners address those encroachments. The current petitioner is trying to address the encroachments, but they are unable to fully meet the zoning district standards to construct one single-car garage that would accommodate a standard-sized car today. Standard 4 does appear to be substantially met by reducing or eliminating encroachments into the property to the west, eliminating encroachments into the required 5-foot side yard setback, and substantially reducing the encroachment into the front yard setback. It should be noted that building safety strongly supports the variance, as the carport does not appear to be designed for earthquakes, and to quote them, replacement with a code-compliant garage would remove a significant hazard to both the owner's property and that of his neighbor. Traffic engineering and private development also stated no objection. Standard 5 appears to be partially met in that it is in keeping with the intent of the code, as it is a movement toward conformity with the code, and it is a substantial movement toward conformity with the code. Standard 6 also appears to be partially met in that the encroachments have existed for 33 years. They would be eliminated, and it does not appear that allowing construction of a single-car garage will adversely affect health, safety, and welfare, certainly not to the extent that the existing carport does. And Standard 7 appears to be met in that it's the minimum request to allow construction of the single-car garage, but it also is an asset and a benefit to the surrounding neighborhood by removing much larger encroachments, particularly on the property to the west. Seeing as all the standards did not appear to be substantially or partially met, the department must recommend denial, but if the board at the conclusion of the public hearing does find that those standards are met, the department does provide 2 conditions on page 10 of the packet for the board's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Any board member questions for staff in this case? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. O'Brien, for your presentation. Petitioner, please come forward. If you would, please state your name and spell your last names for the record.
Allison Smith, S-M-I-T-H.
And Kurt Egelhofer, E-G-E-L-H-O-F-E-R.
Good evening to both of you. You'll have 10 minutes for your presentation. I ask that you speak to the 7 standards that Ms. O'Brien just walked us through as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you, Ms. O'Brien, for your summary. We've lived in Anchorage over 30 years, and we eventually plan to move to this house. It's currently rented under lease. It is at 1536 West 14th Avenue, and the request is to grant a variance from the front yard setback. The request is to correct a nonconformity and allow for construction of a single-car garage. We would remove a 2-car carport that's nonconforming and construct a single-car garage. The garage would be 12 feet wide and about 14 or so feet long and would extend in the front yard setback by 4 feet. This is the minimum size needed for a single car. The proposed single-car garage brings the site and home closer to conformance with the existing code. I respectfully disagree with Ms. O'Brien on some of our standards, and I believe that we've met them quite well. Number one, the standard is met due to the fact that there is no platted alley for rear lot access. As she mentioned, we have only front yard access, and the house is very close to the front yard setback and the front yard line. Most of the surrounding blocks in this area have an alley, but for some unknown reason, this block does not. So the location of the home, which is very close to the front lot line, is an exceptional circumstance. It's leaving no room for a garage in the front or side yards. The structure is only about 2,000 square feet, but it's located very close to the front lot line. The lot zoning requires a large front yard setback from the property line. There's approximately 10 feet, and another 10 feet from the property line to the edge of the pavement of West 14th Avenue's right-of-way. So legal setback is 20 feet, but in reality, the setback to the curb is 30 feet. There's a drainage problem in the front yard in this house. Snow melt comes directly off of West 14th Avenue into the yard in the very front of the yard. French drain is going to need to be installed, which means demolishing the existing carport so that we can actually install correct drainage to get the city's water off of our lot, because it does come off of West 14th. Right. We want to take the water to the west and out into our the backyard to let it infiltrate there. So I believe that standard is met. Number two, again, the lack of a rear alley precludes full utilization of the property. Most of the blocks in the neighborhood have alleys. There was no alley provided in this, so we have no backyard access. Many of the surrounding properties have garages. It is reasonable to expect to have a garage on a property in this neighborhood. Many homes have either 1 or 2-car garage, demonstrating it is a common right of enjoyment in the neighborhood. It's a necessity, not just a convenience in a northern climate. To keep the footprint as small as possible, we're proposing the minimum-sized single-car garage. So it sounds like Margaret said we partially met number 3. This situation is not self-imposed. The property has no enclosed garage. The current carport does not conform to zoning code in 2 aspects. The proposed single-car garage brings the site closer to conformance with existing regulations. In order to proactively address these nonconformities, since we bought the house about a year ago, we propose to remove the carport and the concrete pad. The new structure will have a much smaller footprint and be less imposing than the existing carport, and as well be architecturally consistent with the building, which the ugly carport is not. It's not a matter of an inconvenience to only have a carport. Garages are generally accepted as a common right of enjoyment and are a necessity for living in a northern city. In determining how to remove the nonconformities, we considered other locations for construction of a garage. due to the location of the house on the lot, limiting the side yards to 5 feet, and the lack of a rear alley. Replacing the carport with a garage in the same location is the only option available. And I'll skip over number 4 since it's met. On number 5, I believe it is substantially met. The construction of the garage, single-car garage, is consistent with the intent of the code, is a generally allowed use within the zoning, and will eliminate encroachments onto the adjoining lot. The variance will not allow land use that is not permitted in the zoning district, and land use will not change as a result of the variance. The renovation of an older house needing repair will help to preserve property values in the neighborhood. And number 6, I'll skip over, again, substantially met. The variance granted is a minimum. Number 7, partially met. Many properties in this neighborhood have garages. We're asking for the opportunity to bring the property into parity with these other properties. We have designed the garage to be the minimum size necessary for a single-car garage, which will be built to an appropriate scale. This is an opportunity to reduce the footprint at the front of the house and remove a nonconformity. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
And as Allison, my wife, said, we've lived in Anchorage for over 30 years. We care about the community and we care about this neighborhood. This is the 3rd house we've owned in Anchorage. We are downsizing from our house on the hillside. This is our retirement home. We will live in this home for 25 years or more. We want to maintain the architectural integrity of the house. We don't want to go up in height. We want to keep as much floor space as we currently have, which is about 1,900 square feet. We originally proposed a 21-foot long garage in front of the house. We hired an architect. We drew up sketches. Then we talked to our neighbors. Many oppose this, but suggest alternatives, including a minimal. They suggested alternatives, including a minimal 4-foot encroachment. We listened to them. We reduced the extension from what we originally proposed to 14 feet 8 inches, which is only a 4-foot encroachment. This reduces our livable space by 120 square feet. We cannot reclaim the original garage, as suggested by several of our neighbors, because the fireplace and chimney and the boiler are in the way. And Allison has a handout to show that. Our proposed encroachment is only 4 feet and single story. It does not significantly change the aesthetics of the neighborhood or the overall appearance of the existing houses. The garage will not stick out like a sore thumb, as the current carport does, in our opinion. It is a single-car garage, not a double, and we have retained an architect, Mike Mentz, to design it to blend into the existing structure. The only view it will block of our neighbors to the west is of our front yard, and then only when they are standing at their garage door. They will not see it from their living room or from any of their front windows. This proposal is not precedent-setting for very significant zoning changes or setback variances, which many neighbors are citing and clearly fear. This is a minor variance only, 4 feet and single-story, single garage. Every variance request should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis and on the merits of each case. We would oppose a major or significant variance, as we do not wish to change the aesthetic characteristics of the street or the neighborhood either. One objection submitted was for our original proposal with an 11-foot encroachment, not the current reduced proposal. So I'd like to make that point. And we'd like to reserve our remaining time for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egelhofer, and thank you, Ms. Smith. You'll have just under 2 minutes left for rebuttal. If you can hold on for just a minute, we may have some questions for you. Any board members have questions for the petitioners? So for clarification, and based on the drawing just submitted to the board, you will be, it looks like, cutting into your existing livable space to create the garage. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we've drawn in we have a Volvo sedan, which we currently own. And this is drawn to scale. It shows how the doors open. And you can see we have a boiler and hot water heater. The boiler is it's a hot water baseboard system, and there are 4 zones. So moving the boiler is a very significant effort. And then I think we would, if we had to push it further into the house, the garage, if we didn't get the 4-foot setback, we'd have to demolish the chimney and the fireplace.
Thank you. Any other board member questions for the petitioners? Mr. Cars.
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Egelhofer, could you walk me through this sketch one more time, please? This is a sketch of what you're proposing, or what would have to be done to reclaim the garage, what at one time was a garage?
Yes, through the chair. It is a sketch of what we're proposing in our current, it shows a dotted line at the bottom. That's the edge of the setback. And we're proposing the 4-foot encroachment. So the garage would be partially addition and partially poked into the house.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Ms. O'Brien, does staff have any questions for the petitioners?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you both. If you'll have a seat, we'll open it up for public testimony. Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify in this case? If so, please come forward. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Christian Ullmann. My last name is spelled Ullmann.
Good evening, Mr. Ullmann. You'll have 3 minutes. We ask that you speak to those standards as well that we have to decide the case upon.
Thank you. I'm one of the neighbors of the 8 neighbors that opposed in writing this variance. In addition to the city has suggested denial of this variance. The reason mainly is this, that there will be an extension and changes the look of the neighborhood when you have that garage coming out. I'd like to start out by saying there's more to this story. This house that we're talking about right now was built with a garage, and I think that has been understood. Previous owners decided to claim the garage as living space. Then they built that carport that is clearly non-conforming and constitutes even a certain danger. This whole variance is built a bit on a convoluted issue, namely a non-conforming carport and a garage that then would comply and make the non-conformity a conformity. I think that's an incorrect situation. The carport is clearly non-conforming. It is dangerous. It is reaching over to our property. In the analysis and the recommendation of the city, I would like to address 2 standards, actually 3 standards that were allegedly met, and I would like to beg different with documentation that the city provides. Standard 4 is supported by Ron Wild of the Planning and Zoning section that claims that this would be good to tear the carport down and replace it with a non-compliant garage, but with a code-compliant garage. But again, that's mixing the issues. The carport would need to go anyway because they pretty much documented that this is a problem. The second thing is that the standard number 6, the standard 6 says there's no damage or danger to the health of the neighbors, etc. However, when you look at the page 16 of the zoning district, that's the private development section, they clearly state that concentrate drainage flows from the structure shall not flow into the adjacent properties or create adverse impact to the right-of-way. With that roof that they are proposing, there will be much more water than at this point running towards our house. I need to remind you that this whole neighborhood is on a slight slant, so we will get that water no matter what. So we're impacted by that. The majority of the people that have written to you really oppose number 5, or in non-support of number 5, which the city claims to have been met. the majority of people feel that this is really impacting the look of the neighborhood, as this thing will stick out. And when you would drive down West 14th, you would clearly see a conformity and quite a setback of the properties.
Mr. Ullman, thank you. Your time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to? Oh, excuse me, Mr. Ullman, actually, if you could come back. I forgot one important part of public testimony, and that's questions.
Okay.
Do any board members have questions for Mr. Ullman? Mr. Kars.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Yeoman.
I'm sorry, before you start out, I need to tell you that I'm hard hearing, and I might need my wife to help me with this, just in case I can't copy you.
Sure. Can you tell me, where do you live? Are you the property that's been referred to adjacent to the subject property?
That is correct. My property is to the west, downhill of that project. My address is 1544. It may be of interest, and I don't want to use up more time than allowed, but it may be interesting to note that our house that we live in was remodeled 2 owners ago. It had the exact same scenario. It had a garage that was reclaimed as living space and had a carport built. Then, not the previous owner, but the one before that, reclaimed that garage space and ripped the carport down to be in conformity with code and built the garage out to the permissible setback that is allowed. So we have now a garage, and that's because of that modification. But that was the same thing. The previous garage in the project in discussion was the same style and the same size. And again, the history is the same. They turned it into living space and added a carport to park their cars. Recognizing that we have sympathy with the Eckelhofers, that they bought themselves a liability, but at the same time, it does have an impact on the neighborhood. If that garage, and if that variance is approved, if the variance is approved, it will have an impact on the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Yeoman. You actually anticipated my next question with your discussion there. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Ullman? No? Okay. Ms. O'Brien, does staff have any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. One point of clarification, Mr. Oldhoven, you did mention a comment by Ron Wild. I think you mentioned planning and zoning. I think he's with building safety. Just for the record, to clarify that. Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else from the public wishing to testify in this case?
Good evening, Board. My name is Diana, and the last name is Ligus, Ligus. I, too, am at 1544 West 14th Avenue, and that would be immediately west to the property in consideration. I would like to speak to number 1 and number 2. And while the city has already indicated, I do want to make some comments about some in reference to what they had mentioned. The lots on the south side of West 14th Avenue are very, very much the same. They're all flat lots. And in that neighborhood, some of the houses do, I don't know if you call it a benefit or not a benefit, do have alleys. There are a lot of streets that don't have alleys. And on this particular street, with the houses situated that they are, people pretty much are conformed. I mean, I don't think that there's anybody that's out of whack on the street. Everybody's lined up like they're supposed to be, and that's what kind of is beautiful about this particular street. Of the houses that are on there, because it's R2D, there's 11 residences. 8 lots, 11 residences. If you take away theirs, that's 10. Of those 10, 60%, 6 out of those 10 do not have garages. So you're talking about 1600, 1602, you're talking about 1610, 1612, 1622, 1624. Those houses do not have garages. As you know, I'm sure you've been in Anchorage for a while, South Addition does have really small garages. And so when I first talked with Kurt about this, I had suggested just reclaim it, do what, the folks did before us, reclaim that. Now, what it did to us is it caused us to lose a whole bunch of living space. We're down to like 1,300 square feet now. However, it didn't force us into any encroachments for people to get upset about, because it is a neighborhood where people are very connected. And so when I spoke with Kurt about it, I said, reclaim that space. That's probably the easiest way to do that. And when I talked to him about it, later it kind of bothered me because he had indicated to me that they wanted to bring it out to the front, which, a couple feet probably wouldn't have bothered me so much. But then as I thought about it, I asked him about the back space. He had said that they wanted to keep the back space as storage. And then later I thought to myself, well, you know what? I think all of us would like to have more storage, but that's not something that we can do and bank on being able to build out into a setback. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And one final comment I'd like to make is in regards to what really feels like a red herring with this code violation that's out there. Right now, the overhang, the carport is flat. And for us, being directly to the west, the beauty of that means that there's small pillars and light comes through. So there's no light problems. There's no blocking off of anything. With the garage being made, there will be a block. We will see a wall when we come out of our house, and that's not something that we expect in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll hold on for just a minute, any questions for Ms. Legas? No. Ms. O'Brien, does staff have any questions based on that testimony?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? If so, please come forward. Please state your name, spell your last name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Halpern, spelled H-A-L-P as in Peter, E-R-N. I oppose this variance for the reasons that have been stated by my neighbors. And in my mind, it seems like it's an issue of a carport that is certainly problematic. And the way I view things is that can be handled by rebuilding the carport so that it is within the standards that safety management deems necessary to withstand seismic activity. That would be one solution. Another solution would certainly be to reclaim the living space that was once the garage. So I feel that it's important to continue to maintain the aesthetic character of our neighborhood and not have this variance, which would be causing the garage to protrude towards the street. I would also like to mention that in terms of solutions for the owners, some of the neighbors have, or at least one in particular, has accessed the space behind their property. These lots are, and I'm going to give a number, then I think it's an approximate number, that all these lots on this south side are 9,893 square feet. And one of my neighbors has utilized the space behind the house and has built an addition. So that certainly is an option that is available to the owners without encroaching on the setback from the street. I also feel it's unwise to set a precedent of this nature. We have a very special neighborhood in South Addition, and people really make an effort to be in conformity with the aesthetic values that we hold dear in that neighborhood. So I really think that codes are in place for very specific reasons, as you all know, and appreciate. And I would also direct you to page 25. I wrote a letter in opposition to this variance. Thank you for letting me comment tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Halpern. Board members have any questions for Mr. Halpern? Okay. Staff have any questions?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Halpern. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Please state your name, spell your last name for the record. You know the drill.
Hi, my name is Evan Rose, ROSE. I live across the street at 1607 West 14th. Since my neighbors have stated most of the cases, I would just really only have two things. First, it's just a question of fairness in the neighborhood. I myself have lived in another place in the neighborhood that had the same thing, a garage space that was claimed, and it's kind of the drill, is that there are a lot of houses in Turnagain and South Addition and lots of places in Anchorage where they're older houses. People have claimed the garage space. They know they have to do a carport in front if they don't have an alley. That's just the way it goes because of zoning, and they don't really have a choice. And then to come back later and say, well, no, we actually deserve a garage now, it doesn't seem really quite fair. So that's just the one thing. And there are a number of other houses on the block that would also probably then immediately ask for a variance, maybe. And then the other thing that I would be in favor of is if someone wanted to build behind their house, and the requirement then would be to have a driveway to get there along the side. If in fact that created a problem with the variance, then I would be in favor of something like that, because it does put the cars behind the house, and aesthetically would be nice. And if that driveway caused some problem, I think that would be an okay solution. So.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any questions for Mr. Rose by the board? No? Staff have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rose, for your testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? If so, please come forward.
Mr. Chair and board, we thank you for listening to us tonight. I also live at, my name is Barbara Rose, R-O-S-E, and I live at 1607 West 14th Avenue. And as they spoke this evening, they said they spoke with the neighbors before they approached us personally, but we were never approached, and we live across the street. So that's one thing that we were never talked to about it. And we would have let them know that we would have not been thrilled with them building a garage. I don't want to reiterate everything that my neighbors have said, but I agree that that the garage that was once there should be reclaimed. And only three houses on the south side of the street have garages, and the rest have carports. So that's one thing. And just building this garage would take away the character of our neighborhood, and we don't want that. So thank you for listening tonight, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Any questions by the board or staff? Okay.
No.
Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Rose, for your testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify in this case? If so, please come forward. Okay. Seeing no one else from the public wishing to testify, we'll close we'll ask the petitioners if they have any rebuttal. I think they had just under 2 minutes left.
Well, we'd like to thank our neighbors for coming out and testifying, even though they don't support us. It's part of the democracy we live in. To the board and the chair, we didn't build the carport. It's been there for 35 years. We do plan to reclaim part of our living space, as I pointed out in the sketch that I gave you all. If we go any further into it, we have to demolish basically the whole west side of our house to do it. And we'd have to take out the fireplace and the chimney. There were several suggestions about putting it in the back, but we can't do that because we only have 5 feet on either side of our house. So unless we owned a motorcycle, we wouldn't be able to get to the garage. Our neighbors said that the drainage will be made worse by the proposal. I'm an engineer. I work for the water and wastewater utility. We will fix the drainage problem that exists. Another point was made that there's only 60% of the houses have garages. That's on one side of the road. On the other side of the road, almost every house has a garage. You want to add anything, Allison? So we're trying to work within the bounds, but we're boxed in. If we don't get the variance, we'll probably sell the house and find a house with a garage. This house fit everything perfectly for our retirement home, except for the fact that it doesn't have an enclosed garage, and a carport doesn't do it. When I'm 70 or 80 years old, parking in a carport is not what I plan to do in Anchorage, and I don't plan to leave Anchorage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions based on that rebuttal by board members? None? Okay. Anything from staff at all? Okay. Oh, sorry, Ms. Smith. You do have 3 seconds.
Oh, I was just waiting for questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. All right, with that, we'll close the public hearing, and the matter now rests with the board. Ask a board member to step forward and make a positive motion in this case. You don't have to literally step, just stating a motion would be fine. Mr. Vig, thank you. Would you like to state your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to case number 2011-139, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 2140-040G1 to allow construction of a single-car garage that will encroach into a required 20-foot front yard setback, subject to conditions 1 and 2 on page 10 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Vig, and Mr. Dunham, thank you for seconding that motion. Mr. Vig, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Standard number 1, there exist exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances. I struggle with this one. I believe that the physical circumstances present on this lot are, in essence, the same as other applicable land in the same district, and so I don't see a way for that standard to be met. Standard number 2, because of these physical circumstances, strict application of this code would create an exceptional or undue hardship. Again, I don't see the physical circumstances that rise from a condition of the land. I agree with staff's analysis that standard number 3 is maybe partially met, but it does appear that although creating or constructing a single-car garage as proposed would reduce the existing encroachment in the front, it would not totally eliminate it. Standard number 4, the variance, if granted, will not adversely affect the use of adjacent property. I believe that standard could be substantially met with enough provisions in place from the engineering development department to make sure that there would be no runoff entering other adjacent properties. Standard number 5, the variance, if granted, will not change the character of the zoning district. I think from the basis of the testimony of neighbors tonight, I find it hard to see that standard could be met. It seems that there would be some significant changes to the character of the zoning district. Standard 6, that the variance, if granted, does not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the municipality. I believe that that standard is substantially met, as staff found. In fact, the existing carport is potentially not structurally designed adequately and could present a safety issue. The garage, I believe, could exist without impacting adversely the health, safety, or welfare of the people of the municipality. Standard 7, variance is the minimum that will make possible a reasonable use of the land. I believe that the applicant did as much as they easily could to minimize the need for the encroachment, but I think that it could be possible to reclaim the entire area, as others in the neighborhood have done, and not require an encroachment and still have the garage, which I believe we, in other cases, have deemed as a pretty important part of living in Anchorage. So for those reasons, I don't find that all the 7 standards are met, and I do not intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Vig. Mr. Dunham, would you like to speak to the motion?
Mr. Chairman, I also do not intend to support this variance for the reasons that Mr. Vig mentioned. I think what the petitioners tried to do was admirable, but I don't believe that we have sufficient reason to grant a variance in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham. Would any other board members like to discuss the motion? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, with that, let's go ahead and vote. That motion fails with 7 nay votes and 2 board members absent. Let me read for the record. Every final decision of the board shall clearly state on its face it is a final decision with respect to all issues involved in the case, and that the parties have 30 days from the date of mailing or other distribution of the decision to file an appeal to the Superior Court. Thank you to the petitioners and members of the public who came down to testify this evening. Let's take 5 minutes. All right, I believe we're all present and accounted for once again. Thank you. Let's finish out with our 4th case, 2011-138. Is the petitioner Melvin Culverwell present? They've indicated that he is, in fact, here. Thank you. Ms. Ferguson, I believe this is your case. If you could please provide sufficiency of notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 62 public hearing notices were mailed. 1 was returned with objection to the encroachment. The applicant seeks a variance from AMC 2140-090, which requires a 20-foot rear yard setback to allow a 30-foot by 48-foot fabric structure to have a 15-foot setback, a yard encroachment of 25%.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Go ahead and proceed with your case when you're ready.
A fabric structure has been placed northwest of the house and is about 25 feet from the house. The fabric structure encroaches about 5 feet into the required 20-foot rear yard setback. It is about 15 feet from the lot line. The request is to allow the fabric structure to encroach into the rear yard setback. This case results from a public complaint. Regarding standard number 1, the standard is not substantially met. This is a pre-existing man-made condition. The lot is a legal R7 lot. There are no known physical issues related to the need for this variance. Standard number 2, the standard is not substantially met. There are conforming locations for the fabric structure. The petitioner has stated that the location of the septic system, interference with the driveway, and snow removal leave no other location. The as-built shows there is adequate space to place the structure without having to locate it within the rear yard setback. The structure is placed 5 feet into the 20-foot setback. There do not appear to be any physical circumstances that preclude shifting the fabric structure 5 feet to the south. Strict application of the legal setbacks in the code would not deprive the owner of the common rights of enjoyment shared by the neighborhood. Standard number 3, the standard is not substantially met. There are no physical conditions affecting the lot and related to the need for the variance. The need for the variance is a result of the actions of the applicant. The petitioner did not apply for a land use permit for the fabric structure. Had Mr. Culverwell applied for a permit, the department could have informed him that the structure could not be placed within the setback. Standard number 4, the standard is not substantially met. This variance case results from a code enforcement complaint. Comments from building safety state that the manufacturer indicates in their sales information that their building does not have engineered wind and snow ratings. Standard number 5, this standard is not substantially met. The setback reduction does not change the character of the zoning district. However, the requested variance is dimensional and not a use variance. Standard number 6, the standard is not substantially met. The fabric structure would not meet municipal building codes as the structure does not have engineered wind and snow ratings. Standard 7, the standard is not substantially met. There is no physical defect to the property directly related to the need for the variance and a reasonable use of the property. There are conforming locations for the fabric structure by shifting the structure 5 feet to the south. There is adequate lot area for the structure to have been built within the legal setbacks. As the standards are not substantially met, the department recommends denial and that the fabric structure be removed or moved to a conforming location within 90 days.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Do any board members have questions for Ms. Ferguson? Mr. Cars.
Yes, through the chair, Ms. Ferguson, on page 8 of the staff packet, it appears that we have an as-built from, I believe it was 1999, but then there's been updates, states updated 10/4/11, and the dimension shown of the shed to the property line is 15 feet plus or minus, or not the shed, but this subject structure. Do you know, or do we know, was that a surveyed dimension by a licensed surveyor, or is that a petitioner's measurement? Typically, we get something that's more accurate than that, and I'm questioning whether this was done by a licensed surveyor or not.
Through the chair, Mr. Cars, it appears that it was originally. It's signed by, or there's a stamp here which says Robert C. Johnson, registered land surveyor. Whether the revised and updated version, was re-examined by Mr. Johnson, I can't tell. It looks like somebody went over the signature, whether that was Mr. Johnson or the applicant, I can't tell you.
All right, well, perhaps the petitioner can answer that when they come forward.
Ms. Ferguson, I have a question about the one public comment that was received in opposition. It mentions green belt in quotes and vegetation easement in quotes. Does the department have knowledge of that and its potential relevance to the case? Could you elaborate at all on where that comment may be coming from? Again, of course, not asking you to speak for that commenter, but...
Mr. Ron, I don't know. It doesn't seem to indicate quite where that 10-foot greenbelt zone is, on which side of the property. So I don't really have any knowledge beyond what is stated here.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Any other questions by the board? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. If the petitioner would please come forward, please state and spell your last name for the record.
Old word. Melvin Culverwell, Culverwell.
Good evening, Mr. Culverwell. You'll have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Hey, thank you, sir. When I first started looking at this building, I called Clearspan and asked them all about permits, structuring, Alaska, everything. They said they never had any problem with anybody before, and they had hundreds of thousands of buildings all over the world, the United States and France, everywhere. So what I did, I went through that. I talked to different people, some different people up here about the zoning and stuff, and they said as long as you got a canvas shack like this or a greenhouse type of a deal, you didn't have to have a building permit. So that's why I didn't inquire about a building permit. Then I went to my neighbors behind me and all the way around me and asked what they thought about it. Everybody said it'd be a great idea. So at that time, I looked at my as-built on my house, and I could see that I had 10 foot on both the east and west side, and nothing was stipulated on the back. So I talked to Mr. Michael Johnson, which is my neighbor right directly behind me, and he said it was 15 feet. So he drew a line, he put the line from stake to stake. I came off that 15 feet, and that's why I used the 15 feet. I had the structure pretty much up when the zoning gentleman came by and asked me where my permit was at. So I explained that I didn't get a permit because I didn't think I needed one. So that's what I learned, that I had to come down and get a permit. I walked into the gentleman in there, and he said everything looked good. Even the setback was 15 feet. So, but he said due to the structure size, I had to go get a variance. So then I went over to the other gentleman, and he said that, yeah, there was a 20-foot setback. So, which that was not going to be a problem. But I didn't realize it until later. And only because of my stupidity, I didn't go and ask somebody else about it. So that's why we applied for the variance.
Any questions by board members for petitioner? Mr. Vig.
Thank you. Mr. Culverwell, is your structure open on both ends as is shown in some of the photos in the packet?
Yes, it is, sir. It's open because the zoning gentleman told me to stop working on it.
Okay. And the structure is supported on some, looks like a structural wall system or something?
It's a 4-foot 2x6 wall.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you. Is there another reason besides having to, I guess, tear down the structure and move it for not being able to move it 5 feet to the south that would put it into the conforming location?
Not really. The thing I could do, since it's canvas, I could take the back of it off and move it to the front.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Kars.
Yes, Chair, Mr. Culverwell, the 15-foot dimension that's shown on this figure on page 8, is that, have you had that surveyed, the actual location, or is that just what you've measured?
No, that Mr. Johnson, I think that's what his name was.
Uh-huh.
He came out and measured stuff up, and since he was the one that did the original one,
okay,
he changed it there for me.
So that is his,
that is,
has been measured by?
That's from him, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Dunham.
Yes, Mr. Culverwell, what were you going to use the building for?
Mainly like a shop and storage. Keep things out of the snow because everything, I plow snow in the wintertime and everything gets built up so
Like
big
a
with
personal
snow.
shop?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other board members have questions for Mr. Culverwell? Okay. Ms. Ferguson, does the department have any questions for the petitioner?
No questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a seat. We'll see if anyone from the public wishes to testify. If so, please come forward. Please state your name, spell your last name for the record.
My name is John Trescott, T-R-E-S-C-O-T-T. I wrote a letter for Melvin there. It's on page 38. And as far as everything, I mean, all of his neighbors that were around him, he spoke with before he even started the building. The people behind him, the people next to him on both sides, the people across the street, everybody was in agreement with me. I live I'm the last house on the end of the street, and I think it's a great shop, great location, everything like that. Not only that, almost everybody on the block assisted in construction of this thing. You know, it's just a hoop barn. You know, you just put it together, and it's the canvas is drove over top. Almost everybody participated in, and you could see by the letters that was true. And as far as, I don't think that it affects the neighborhood in any way, in the way it looks or anything like that. And as far as the question that you had, as far as the green belt, Mr. Culverwell didn't touch any of the trees in front of the house. There's 30-foot of trees there, so I mean, I don't think it affected it at all. And not only that, I was one of the ones who fell most of the trees in the back, and they were rotten and dead, and just the garbage that we pulled out of there, that was everyone on the street. I live down at the end of the block. When I did the landscaping on my front lawn, we pulled out almost entire pieces of cars that were buried underground. That's, I guess, just the way that Robindale subdivision was at the time. I guess back in the day, they just buried things underground instead of disposing them. So I think that what Mr. Culverwell did for Sunnyside Drive was a great improvement. I don't think it looks bad or anything like that. And the fact that he went to all of his neighbors and talked to them first before he even started doing it, I thought was a great thing, you know, for his community and things like that. And he, you know, wanted the shed, just like he said, for his plow truck. He consequently plows all the driveways on Sunnyside and all the adjacent neighborhoods in the area. He also does the American Legion, of which me and him are both a member of, Post 33 there in Peters Creek. I think that everything Mel does, he's very community-minded, and I don't think that he was trying to hurt anybody or going against any variance. I mean, because I was under the assumption, too, that the 15-foot easement, that was standard all the way across the on Sunnyside Drive. See, his property is a little bit bigger than mine. His 3/4 of an acre, mine is half. That just changed halfway down Robindale subdivision. And I don't think that it went against any of the things that were said that were not substantially met. I think that he really went out of his way for the community to make sure that he wasn't going to step on anybody's toes or anything like that. It just seemed like it came down to a code violation with the municipality. And Mr. Chair, I greatly appreciate and board members the chance to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trescott. If you'll hold on for just a minute, we'll see if we have any questions for you. Any questions by the board? Mr. Trescott? No? Any questions by staff?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Trescott, for your testimony. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to testify? Okay, seeing no one else in the audience. Public? Okay, the petitioner does have a little bit of time left if you wanted to rebut anything that Mr. Trescott said. No? Okay. Mr. Cars, it looks like we may have a question for you, Mr. Culverwell.
Yes, I do have one question of the petitioner. I note in the staff packet there are a number of letters in support of this variance from your neighbors. Are any of them from the neighbor immediately to the north, your rear lot?
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, Michael Johnson, he's the one directly behind me.
Okay, and I see.
He was on his way down here too, but he had trouble with his wife or something.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Get that.
Mr. Dunham, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I had another question, Mr. Culverwell. I guess, would you have a problem moving this structure?
The whole structure, it would be a real major deal. But what I could do, I could move the back wall in. Since it is a canvas structure, I could probably tie it under. I'd have to put new holes in it for new tie downs, but I can make it do.
One of the other problems I see, and I'm not sure that staff picked this up, but isn't there supposed to be a 10-foot separation between structures as well?
Yes, there should be.
Okay. You know, even if you did that, you'd have to do something about the shed next door to it. So, I mean, it sounds like your neighbors like it, and it sounds like, you know, you've done a, you know, pretty decent job of trying to, you know, put this together without objection to the neighborhood. But, you know, we have these zoning laws here that we need to, unless you've got some really unusual circumstances, and it sounds like you forgot to get a land use permit.
Like I say, I didn't get a land use permit because I was informed I didn't need one. That's the only reason I didn't get one.
Yeah. It's a pretty big building not to get a land use permit, so. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
A quick question or point of conversation, I guess. Mr. Dunham, you raised the issue of separation between the shed and the canvas structure. Is that separation distance between accessory structures applicable per code, or is that between primary and accessory structures?
I believe it's separation between structures, period, isn't it? I don't have a copy of my code with me.
Ms. Ferguson, if you could help us out with that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm looking through it right now, and I don't see anything that speaks to that.
You're looking under the accessory 2145.
Is it 030?
But typically, as Mr. Dunham stated, it is a 10-foot separation.
As I see 2145.030, Section B, it states no separate accessory building shall be erected closer than 10 feet to any principal structure on the lot or an abutting lot or tract, if that in fact is the correct code citation.
So it's okay to have two accessory structures closer than 10 feet? Is that what that's saying?
That's my interpretation, but I'll ask other board members and staff as well for confirmation or denial of that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like what you may be able to do, Mr. Culverwell, is move 5 feet of your structure forward.
I can do that.
Ms. Denny, did you still have a question?
My question was if that code was enforceable in his area because he's outside of the municipality. No, he's outside of the Title 21.
Title 23, I think, is what's in question in terms of application. Title 21 still applies to the subject property, I believe.
I thought I was reading on in the packet that his structure did not need a building permit.
Under Title 23.
Right.
Okay. So I'm confused. I apologize, Ms. Denny, about what the question is at hand.
About the separation, if his buildings had to conform to the 10-foot separation.
Got it. Okay. And what I'm tying that to, Ms. Denny, is Title 2145.030, which does apply. Mr. Kars.
Yes, Mr. Culverwell, you might feel you're answering the same question over and over again, but I'm going to ask it again. What I've heard you say is that you could move, keeping the structure approximately where it is, you could shift 5 feet, take 5 feet off the rear of the structure and move it 5 feet to the north.
Yes, sir. I'd have to chop 5 feet off the back of it. Rather than move the structure, I just have to cut the 5 feet off the back.
And if that was the case, there'd be no reason for you to have this variance this evening. You understand?
If they allow me to do that, yes, sir.
Okay. Because that's, we must find, you've probably heard, I know you've been sitting here all night, that we have 7 standards. We have to find all 7 standards have been met.
True.
And if one of those is standard 7, the minimum, that this is the minimum standard, well, and I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but my thought process is that, and I believe Ms. Williams had asked the question originally, but I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth either. Maybe a variance isn't even necessary then, in that you can just move 5 feet from the back to the front.
It was explained to me that I had to get the variance before they'd give me a permit. And when I went in, the first thing they said was the building was larger than my house, so therefore that was part of the variance too, and it hasn't been mentioned here, and I didn't know about that either. If it was only the 5 feet, I could have solved that a long time ago. But my question to you folks is, do I still have to have a permit, and do I still have to take this 5 feet off the back?
Well, as far as whether or not you need a permit, I don't think it's under our board's purview to directly answer that question. We have to look at the case regarding the variance in respect to the encroachment itself. And I think what my fellow board members are getting at is that there may be a way to resolve the situation that doesn't include a variance. And if, in fact, there is no encroachment, then you should be able to move forward with that building permit process if, in fact, one is required. Mr. Kars, to extend your question, I guess, what are the ramifications of us acting on this variance if, in fact, we don't grant a variance? Does the petitioner have to tear down that structure or just make it conforming?
Yeah, there were a couple questions there, and I think you answered one, that we are just looking at this variance, just so the petitioner understands, on the existing location of the structure. And this board is not granting a permit for that. That would still have to go through building safety. So
right.
Our variance request before us is just for that building to encroach 5 feet into the 20-foot setback. My comment was, I guess, more a statement, and that it'll be open for discussion during deliberation on whether we feel the variance is warranted or not. I'm assuming the petitioner wants to move forward with his variance request, but just that was my statement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kars. Mr. Dunham?
I think, Mr. Culverwell, you brought up another issue about the size of the structure, and I'm not sure that this board can answer your question about whether or not that even matters. And I used to work in that office where you were going to go get your permit 22 years ago. That's when I left. But one of the things that we always looked at is whether or not the use was accessory to the primary structure. Your primary use of your property is as a residential lot, correct?
Right.
So anything accessory to that would be permitted unless it's otherwise prohibited in the code. And storage of vehicles and things like that, that's okay so long as you're not running a storage yard or anything right. of that nature. But while I worked there, we never had a good answer for how big an accessory structure could be. But that's something that may be different now. My experience is 22 years old. So, you probably should ask the folks if that's another issue, but that's not one of the variances you're getting tonight. If we grant a variance, it's going to be for you to have that structure 5 feet closer to your rear property line than would be otherwise allowed. And I think what Mr. Kars was saying tonight and what I was trying to get to is if you're willing to move it, you don't need a variance. I mean, even at that, you can go in and tell the building safety folks for your land use permit, I'm going to take 5 feet off of the back of the building and move it to the front, and it'll be conforming. So, I don't know if that helps you, but that's my understanding of it. So
It'll help me if I can explain that to them so they get what you folks are telling me.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Culverwell while we have him at the podium? Mr. Cars, do you have a suggestion on how to proceed based on the...
I guess ask the petitioner, he's paid his money to have his case heard.
Mhm.
Is there any, I'm asking the question to him, is there any harm in us hearing his variance request and acting on it, but perhaps it's an understanding if the variance isn't granted, what his options are. I guess I'm assuming we have a case before us to act on. That's what I intend to move forward with.
Okay.
Unless someone from the board has any other ideas.
Ms. Williams, go ahead and weigh in.
I wonder if we could postpone this case so that Mr. Culverell could attempt to work through these issues, building permit issues, because it seems like there's some confusion on his part and our part as far as what our action on the variance request may do. If we deny the variance, is he then going to be required to tear down the whole structure, or will he then be allowed to make alterations to it to move 5 feet to the back? So I'm just wondering on that. I have some concerns about acting on the variance without knowing what impact that would have on his ability to keep the structure.
Perhaps ask the petitioner if it's time sensitive or not.
Is this a time sensitive?
No, it's no time sensitive at all. I just wanted to get it up before it snowed too much, so I could keep my pickup dry, but that ain't going to happen.
I don't even know if this is proper procedure, but would you be willing to postpone this
Sure.
hearing to allow you some time to work through the issue with?
You bet. That way I can get more educated on what I need to do, too.
Okay.
Okay. Does staff have any opposition or comment to that path forward?
Yes, Mr. Chair and the Commission, there are a couple of things here that you all should be aware of. One, I believe the fabric structure was placed on a concrete pad.
Not on a pad, footing.
Oh, concrete footing.
Just to hold it down.
All right, because there can't be any sort of structure, within that 20-foot setback. If there were a concrete footing or pad, that would have to be removed as well. So I don't know how that would affect the structure. And I don't know that there is, but just to let you know that there can't be any sort of structure, and the footing would according to code, would come under that definition.
Question, real quick, Ms. Ferguson, would the 30 inches above grade have any bearing on that interpretation of structure within the setback? And if we can't come up with an answer now, perhaps we can...
I have it right here. The code reads, structure means anything which is constructed or erected and located on or under the ground or attached to something fixed to the ground.
Thank you for the clarification. And I'm sorry, I may have cut you off in a few other comments you had in assisting us here.
Okay, and there's one other thing. I did speak at some length to staff in the engineering department, structural engineering, and they said should the variance be approved, Mr. Culverwell would still have to, you'll see it in the bottom on page number 12. It's the last paragraph where Ron Wild says, we therefore suggest that approval for this request be conditioned by the submittal of evidence showing that this specific structure is adequate to withstand design, wind, and snow loads for this area. And I asked specifically, what does that mean? And they said he would have to hire a structural engineer to provide that evidence. So again, just to make Mr. Culverwell aware that he would have to have a structural engineer provide that evidence to the department.
Okay, Mr. Culverwell, Ms. Ferguson's, do staff's comments there have any bearing on whether or not you would want to postpone and gather more information?
Yeah, the thing I don't understand is they wanted the paperwork from the company. I sent them a copy of that because it is a I don't know how you say it, structured engineer, not engineered. So if it's not engineered from the factory, how can it be engineered here with a metal structure person that...
Well, the case, if there is one before us that we're to act on tonight, has to do with the encroachment itself. I, in looking at the standards, have some difficulty in moving towards granting of a variance, and it seems like other board members may share that sentiment. So we'd like to work with you, and if you're willing to, in fact, postpone to see what remedy outside of a variance may be allowable or enjoyable to you, then perhaps that's an option.
You bet.
Staff, is that okay? It seems as if the petitioner is electing.
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. Mr. Dunham, did you have a comment?
I was just going to suggest that, if you were to postpone it tonight, that would give you the time to do it. If we were to vote on it tonight and we didn't grant the variance, you couldn't come back to request one on that issue. So postponing it may be the best thing so that you can work this issue a little more. And you might even want to ask Mr. Wild to get the municipal attorney involved on this, because this isn't in a building code area.
Okay.
If the public hearing is open, do we have to, is that the next hearing? Do we have to reopen there, reorder? Okay. Okay, I'd say that we keep the public hearing open. Okay. All right, the question, Ms. Ferguson, go ahead. Did you have...
Yes, I was just responding to Mr. Dunham's statement. Although it is outside of the area where we review and inspect, nevertheless, any structures have to meet building code.
Okay. Mr. Kars.
And not to beat a dead horse, Mr. Culverwell, I know you have spoken with the manufacturer, but I wouldn't be surprised if you might take another phone call with them as well, but there may be additional information that they could provide in support of their structural calculations, just as a suggestion if we move forward with postponement.
Okay, you have to propose what's the process. All right. Fork in the road, two ways that we can move forward. One being keeping the public hearing open, and if we do that, that leaves opportunity for additional public testimony perhaps the next time that we hear the case before us. The other alternative is to close the public hearing and then reopen pending our... Okay, in person we'd receive that information, or... Okay. Or we close the public hearing, we don't reopen it, we close the public hearing and then receive that information in some form that we're requesting, and then whether the petitioner is present or not, move forward with voting on the variance if in fact that's the direction that this goes. So is there strong favor or opposition to one versus the other of those options?
Is that your motion, Kate? Unless, I don't know if Ms. Williams was the original person that moved it, but I'd move that we close the public hearing and postpone the case until additional information is provided by the applicant.
Okay.
after discussion with staff.
I agree with Mr. Cars.
Okay. Are there any unsettled issues that we need to address while the public hearing is still open? It seems like we've asked and answered a lot of questions.
I think so.
Okay. With that, let's go ahead and close the public hearing. We're not going to vote. We're going to request of you, the petitioner, additional information as discussed during that public hearing, and look forward to receiving that should we assign a date?
Excuse me, Mr. Cars, was that an actual motion on your part?
Yes, it was.
Second, the vote would be appreciated.
Thank you, Jill.
I second Mr. Cars' motion.
And Mr. Cars, did your motion include a date certain on?
It did not, but it could if necessary. Ms. Ferguson, do you know what our caseload is for next month?
I'm afraid I don't. I don't have that information.
I would assume that it's something that we could probably hear next month if the applicant, it would seem like it's pretty straightforward and the process shouldn't take too long, so I'd move that we postpone it till the next public meeting of the zoning board.
If I might.
Understanding that the public hearing has been closed on this part.
You can postpone pending receipt of the information from the applicant as opposed to doing a date certain, unless you really want it back on the agenda and not have all the information.
Let's postpone pending receipt of the information.
Settled. All right, let's go ahead and vote on that motion. All right, the motion that passes with 7 yea votes is to postpone this case pending receipt of information from the petitioner.
Can I get a list of everything that you want from me so we make sure I've got everything I need?
If you could see Ms. Ferguson, the department will help work through that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colville.
Thank you. The board, everybody. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the team effort there. All right.
Good job, Tim.
There's always a chairman's spot open. All right. Agenda item I, reports. I don't believe we have any. Unless staff has any comments or reports. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Any board member comments? Seeing none, wish everybody a happy, healthy, safe holiday. And Mr. Dunham, go ahead.
Did you have a report on what happened with your wife? Or is she?
I should probably look into that, shouldn't I?
Did I miss that?
No, sorry, I didn't announce. I was too tired when Mr. Vig came forward with his song and the responses and emails that all I could muster was, I'll be at the meeting. My wife had our third daughter, thank you for asking, John, on Thanksgiving evening, healthy, happy, and not sleeping. So with that, the meeting is closed. We'll see you next year.